Welcome to Catalyst for Healing. I'm Maria Lloyd, licensed marriage and family therapist, and I'm here today with a very special guest, Keith Kurlander, who is an LPC and the co-founder of Integrative Psychiatry Institute, specializing in integrative mental health and psychedelic therapy education. He also co-hosts the Higher Practice podcast, which I highly recommend. For optimal mental health, he's co-founded the Integrative Psychiatry Centers, a clinic transforming mental health care with innovative treatments. So Keith, why don't you share a little bit more and introduce yourself to the audience? You have so many facets of things that you're doing and working with, and we're excited to have you today.
Great. Yeah. Thanks for having me. It's great to be here and looking
Yeah.
forward to our conversation. Well, I co-founded the Institute about 7 years ago, and it really came from a desire with my co-founder. I'm a psychotherapist. He's a psychiatrist to bring more education around the root causes of mental health issues to professionals, because we both felt like we were pretty frustrated with the run of the mill education that most people get. You have to dig to go get more. And we wanted to sort of create a platform where people could come to get educated and move the needle on what we're, the real struggle we're having right now with the serious problem of mental illness in this
Yeah.
world.
1 out of 4. It's shocking.
1 out of 4. And when you look at young people, it's even scary of what's happened in the last 20 years. 1 out of 3 female teens are seriously contemplating suicide. 1 out of 4 male. It's serious. And, those numbers have astronomically jumped since 20 years ago. So yeah, so that's where we are. And that's how I got here. And here we are.
Yeah. So to tell us a little bit about, you live in Colorado and where psilocybin is legal now, and are also, you've done integration for years with the psychedelic space. So tell us a little bit about, you have a book coming out with your partner that you started the Institute with. Tell us just a little bit about that and how that evolved in terms of your interest in that field and what you're
Yeah.
doing right now within that.
Well, my story really started as a late teenager with psychedelics. I wasn't using psychedelics often, but my first psilocybin experience resulted in a kind of catastrophic mental health crisis that had me have to investigate for a long time what happened. Why did I have such a radical experience on psychedelics, almost led to suicide? And the long story short here is that it took me a very long time to understand that psychedelics were amplifying complex trauma in me. That language wasn't really available then.
Not even
This
known
was,
then, probably.
yeah, this was the 90s, and this was the mid 90s. And trauma psychology was really just starting to grow, and very few people knew about it. And then, of course, even psychedelic awareness was very low. And it's really on the last 5 to 7 years that there's a lot more awareness around psychedelics and what's going on there. So anyways, it started there, and then
Started
my
with a bad
own
trip.
started
Yeah.
it started with a very, very, very challenging experience that then I really began my mental health journey that I was already on my whole life. I just didn't quite know what was going on.
But I like to point that out
Yeah.
because people talk about having these scary experiences, and it may produce mental health issues with psychedelics. What do you think about that in terms of when it's used in the right way with the right integration, how that's different from someone maybe going to another country and using it with people that might not have that experience to help them if something comes up, or doing it on their own in the woods? What
Yeah.
are the risks of that bad trip if it's used in the right way?
I mean, this is like kind of, I think, the good entry point into psychedelics, because this conversation, because I think, first of all, psychedelics are used in a lot of ways, right? So they're used ceremonially, they're used recreationally, they're used therapeutically, they're used for whatever, God knows what else. They're used a lot of different ways. And they've been used different ways over a long period of time on this planet. I would say that therapeutically, if you happen to, you're psychedelic exposure is through a psychedelic therapy experience. And if it's above ground right now, that's probably ketamine, just because that's what's available predominantly. That hopefully you're minimizing a lot of the risk. There's still risk,
Sure.
but having a challenging experience, or what we call a bad trip in psychedelic therapy, it's not really a bad trip. It's just you're actually probably having to deal with some very hard material inside of you that you're wanting to deal with, hopefully, or you probably wouldn't be doing psychedelic therapy. Outside of that, there's some things that can happen on psychedelics, and it's not the majority of people who take them, even in therapy, where you can have some adverse experiences that are uncomfortable. And are they a smoking gun and it's the thing that created your mental illness for the rest of your life? Probably not, but they can, you can leave a psychedelic experience with some issues. You can have some perceptual changes for a while that feel, destabilizing inside of you. And again, it's not the majority. It used to be called flashbacks. You can get fragmented and dissociated. Again, not the main thing. So with these different ways of doing it, just to come back to your question, I think that we minimize that in psychedelic therapy. That's the one place we minimize it the most. And largely the hardest things that occur are therapeutic issues that need attention inside of you, is how I would say it. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, tell us more about your story. Like you said, you were suicidal after this experience. I know you talk about that at 19. So tell us more about, you had this experience that brought up complex trauma that needed to be dealt with, and then what happened from there.
So I had this experience and I didn't know what was going on. I had a lot of very serious psychiatric symptoms. I was severely agitated, I was depressed, I was severe insomnia, really intense intrusive thinking, the personalization, and to very severe amounts. I was very sick. That went on and off in my life for a very long time in my adulthood. Waves of that.
Okay.
Into
Were you still functioning, or did you?
Yeah, I always was functioning. I actually left college. This was in the second to last month of my sophomore year. So I actually ended the semester early and finished. I was able to work it out with my professors. I finished the semester from home. And I went back to college the following fall. It was the spring semester. But I didn't know that I was going to be able to. But I think I was fortunate in my own whatever it is. Like, even though I've had very severe bouts of issues, I've always been functioning well in my life. So that went on and off for many decades, even in my adulthood. And there were rounds of using psychedelics to try and heal that by myself, mostly because psychedelic therapy wasn't really on the scene until at most 7-8 years ago, where it really started coming on the scene. And so there were psychedelic use, but then there was also no psychedelic use for long periods of time. And I've tried everything under the sun. And I'm a psychotherapist, so I went into the profession of the thing I needed most for myself, as many people do as a healer,
Yeah, totally.
So that's how I got here. Yeah.
So what were some of the other modalities that were super helpful for you in terms of working?
As I started
you
to,
had complex PTSD?
yeah.
Or
So
what
as
was
I
your
started to
diagnosis?
seeing what was going on, like so in the beginning, I would say for the first 10 to 10 years, let's say, it was sort of like I didn't know what this was. I had a bunch of different psychiatric labels that kept changing over time, and there wasn't a good framework that made sense to my healing. Like it wasn't helping me heal. And I knew I had some challenges in childhood, but I didn't quite get it. And then it was in my 30s where I started to recognize complex trauma. And the things that were helpful over time, a number of things. I mean, I found somatic experiencing from a trauma therapy modality really useful for me, just because of how I am. I mean, I think when we talk about trauma therapy modalities, it really comes down to the constitution of the individual, of what they're going to respond to. SE was useful for me because there's many entry points of how to work with the trauma in SE.
Can you explain what that is for the audience?
So somatic experiencing was developed by Peter Levine, who's a trauma psychologist, a long time ago. I think This was in the late 80s, early 90s. I can't remember when he actually started developing the technique. And the technique is, I mean, it has the word somatic in it. I would say that the part of the technique is you're uncoupling traumatic associations to sensations in your body in order to, which is a bottom-up approach. This is termed bottom-up and top-down therapies in working with trauma. So bottom-up is sort of the body, using the body, and top-down would be sort of like using cognition to work with the trauma. I mean, every element has both, but every therapy has both. But so somatic experiencing is somewhat very bottom-up. But there's different avenues in somatic experiencing. You can use visualization to enter into the sensations. It's not always just like, okay, focus your attention on sensation. So somatic experiencing was useful for me as one modality.
Yeah.
I would say psychedelics were useful for me and sometimes harmful for me as a modality of healing. Yoga was a big modality of healing for me. That's where I
love
started.
yoga.
Yeah, so that's where I all started. All my healing started with yoga after a couple of years.
Explain why. Like, what was it about yoga that helped you?
So that's its own huge story, but but I'll kind of try and distill it down, which is, so this was late 90s and I graduated college and I was still kind of pretty dysregulated. And I just had the intuition. I had already done, I don't know, a couple of years of psychoanalysis and was on psych meds. And I had already done a couple of years of, I came out of that experience. I was like 21. And I started just having a natural, I was also like becoming more and more spiritual in myself during this whole mental health crisis. And so I was having a very natural rising inside of me of like, I need a guru, I need yoga specifically. I just knew. And at this point, there was no news. I mean, the internet was just coming online. So it was just like coming from within me. I wasn't
And
surrounded
yoga
by
wasn't
any.
popular then. I feel
No,
like
not at all. Yeah, nobody, I mean, you could go to little tiny communities that had some yoga going on in New York City and LA, but it was not popular. I didn't know anything about it at all. I was in Vermont and I was just like, I need to find a yoga teacher that's going to help me deal with my suffering, basically. And so I just was like, started asking. I'm like, I need to find this. And then I was in this incredible house in Vermont and I had to move out. And this guy moves in and we have a conversation and he's like, hey, he just randomly is like, I teach yoga sometimes if you want to come back here. I was like, great. So I start coming back. And then it turns out within a month or two, this person is best friends with my first teacher, which was Yogi Amrit Desai, which is the founder of Kripalu Yoga. And so then I started learning from Yogi Amrit Desai. And that's how it started. So my 20s was mostly focused on healing through yoga. And I was fortunate in that Yogi Amrit Desai was one of the few yoga teachers back then, and even sometimes to this day, who really was able to describe how yoga is really about uncoupling your history from the sensations in your body. And he's a very somatically oriented yogi. And so I had that technique that I was working with. So it's kind of the first trauma technique that I didn't even know why and what I was doing. And I didn't know I was doing trauma work.
You found that.
Yeah. So I found that. So that's how I got into yoga back then. I'm not practicing now, but that was like a big part of my 20s.
Yeah. So again, we like to just, everyone tries something different because something different works for everyone. But yoga is something right now that's so accessible.
I know.
And is such a great way to just start getting more access to connecting with your body. Because most
have
people,
you been doing yoga for a while?
About 5 years. I mean, it doesn't seem like a long time, but for me, it's kind of incredible how much it's shifted how I connect with my body, because I was very dissociated from my body, which I think a lot of Americans are, just because of how our culture is so focused on, cognitive thinking.
Right.
And so, I mean, but it was just a powerful modality for me too. And just having more access and being able to do more with my emotions in terms of having that access.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah.
So I definitely recommend people try it.
Nice.
But tell us a little bit about the book. So like what is your intent? Tell us the title, because it's coming out March 3rd. And we're going to have you and your, what do you call him? Will
Well, he's the other co-founder.
co-founder. Yeah, your co-founder of the clinic are going to come back and do a podcast together to promote the book as it gets closer. But tell us what like brought you guys into creating that and what your intent is.
I think the highest level intent is awareness. I believe psychedelic therapy is an awesome tool. It's not a panacea, but it's an awesome tool that can really help the situation we're in right now as a species. You know, until we get better tools, we need this tools.
Yeah.
So the book is about spreading awareness for the person who either knows nothing about psychedelic therapy and is curious, all the way to the professional who knows some about psychedelic therapy and they want kind of the A to Z understanding of it. We cover everything in the book. So it's for both the professional and sort of the possible patient.
Yeah. And I mean, the thing we do have accessible world or nationwide at least is ketamine therapy. And so you guys do that, you know, quite a bit with your patients. Tell us a little bit about, because I think people are still very intimidated by using any form of drugs.
Yeah.
And, you know, ketamine is a much gentler way to start with a dissociative experience just because it's 40 minutes versus some of these other medicines can be 4 to 6 hours. And so help the audience understand maybe like how they can think of it in a way that's destigmatizing some of the things they've heard or the way that they view it as a street party drug, and just to be open to learning more about why this is a powerful modality.
Yeah, I mean, if you are considering ketamine therapy, it's, you know, ketamine's been a legal prescription medication since the 70s, early 70s, not for mental health treatment.
Started as a anesthetic,
Yeah,
right? For
that's right. So
surgery.
it's for surgery. And so it's got multiple properties. It has pain killing properties. It also has dissociative properties in high doses. In very high, not very high doses. In high doses, it will dissociate you enough that you won't even remember what happened. But in low doses, which started to get discovered around the 2000s, it strangely really helps depression and potentially other mental health issues. And also, not just sort of this isn't even therapy, just in low doses with specific protocols, it helps depression. And then if you combine it with therapy, because it's a psychedelic, at least in the broader sense of how we think about what psychedelics are, then you have a psychedelic experience that you can then use with a therapist to actually do psychological work. Ketamine is an excellent medicine because you can access it medically. It's great from what you said, which is that it's short acting. It's got a short half-life, 20, 40 minutes. You're coming down from the experience. It's a very powerful experience. So not to be too casual in the description of it, because it can be very scary, not in a bad way, but it can become scary because there's a lot of things that you can have to face on ketamine, but powerful in that it can do the job of psychedelic therapy. So I think it's a
What are some
great
examples,
tool.
like in terms of you having an experience with it or clients, and when you say do the job, like just so we can get a better grasp of what that means
Yeah.
experientially.
I mean, I could speak about me since it's a direct experience. I've had one ketamine therapy treatment. This was way later in my journey. And for me, the ketamine therapy treatment, one thing I actually found ketamine therapy mostly to be just really profoundly gratifying. It did get scary for me at the end of it, but there was I actually ended up doing a lot of intergenerational trauma healing in that one session that just came through me around Jewish Holocaust trauma. And I had already known that was a part of my baggage or just lineage, I should say. It's
Sure.
And there's, a lot to extrapolate and growth that can come out of intergenerational trauma, but it's obviously the sad truth of human history. So it was a beautiful session. There were a lot of healing came out of it. And then there was a really hard time at the end where I had a lot of fear and because sometimes a ketamine, there's an ego dissolution where your ego can start to fall away, but it sometimes doesn't fall all the way away. So if it falls all the way away, there's nothing left to be afraid. So it was sort of, I had the process of sort of that fragmented falling away of ego, fighting to stay on. And it was okay. I worked with it with the support person and integrated that after. And I've been through that a lot on psychedelics. It was very familiar to me. So stories. I mean, I haven't directly, but we've treated thousands of patients here and many thousands of patients and just so many different stories of healing. And then, the occasional, things got challenging and it was hard to integrate. That happens too. Fortunately, it's just the smaller minority, but it does happen.
Yeah. So what would you say? I mean, I always think about, it's giving us some distance from like that third party perspective to see maybe more of what the root of the trauma is and awareness of how to move through that. And it integrates it also at a physical level too, because the medicine's kind of working on the body. I mean, how would you define like the purpose of ketamine or psychedelics in general when it comes to healing mental health?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I would say that each medicine obviously has a different sort of route and mechanism almost of what it's doing, not just biological mechanism, psychological mechanism. But with all of that said, I think that there's kind of just a few things that are key. One is there's a biological piece that's different for each medicine. So depending on the medicine, there's some biological processes that can really help you. And that might just mean sort of playing into the neuroplasticity of the brain, dendritic growth and that kind of thing, creating new, connections in the brain. And each medicine doing that in its own different way. And then there's potentially some medicines having kind of some anti-inflammatory effects in the brain. And so that's sort of the biological piece. And then and there's like, well, what psychologically is it getting to the root of? And I would say that because I believe this across any mental health condition, relatively speaking, is that at the root, there's a number of root things, but one thing that's consistent across all of them is trauma. And so psychedelics have a way of helping you access the trauma in your system. And it might not be a memory. It might be an experience of sensation or experience of the way your mind works in psychic spaces of overwhelm that come from patternings of how we related to trauma. But it allows you to do that. And then you have that inflection point on the medicine where maybe you can actually relate to it differently. Now that's where then the medicines work differently. And for very specific trauma, MDMA is the most researched on that. And that is the most gentle of the medicines in terms of working with oneself. And it works really well with not just like, okay, trauma's root cause, but it works well if like you're actually showing a lot of PTSD symptoms.
Yeah.
MDMA, then like ketamine can work on the root cause of trauma, but it also seems to have this very unique effect on the symptoms of depression. And then psilocybin seems to be more in the spectrum of depression.
Right.
And maybe end-of-life anxiety, of course. And now we have LSD is in a phase 3 study also right now.
Okay.
Which is being studied for anxiety.
Yeah.
And then we have ibogaine, which is early stage research, but that's looks more at addiction typically.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know in California, MDMA was slated to get legalized last August, and that got pushed back. But that is the first one that will be legalized, and then it would be psilocybin after that in California. I don't know what it's like in Colorado.
So in federally, just we could go there for a moment, like what's coming. So federally, ketamine is mostly used off-label, which just means that, back in the day when it wasn't generic in the 70s, it was researched for the surgery purpose and dissociating people from pain. So there was no indication. But then in a few 4 years ago, there's another molecular structure of ketamine that was researched for mental health, for depression, treatment-resistant depression. So that's Spravato, and that's a nose spray. But
Yeah.
generally speaking, most people use generic ketamine, not the Spravato, for many reasons. So that's where ketamine is at. And then MDMA got rejected. Went through its phase 3 trial. It had a new drug application by Lykos Therapeutics, formerly MAPS, BBC, and that got rejected in August 2024. But there's it's in the news right now. That is potentially going to get relooked at this year. We don't know. But if it doesn't, there'll be another study that hopefully we see it in a couple years from now, at most.
Okay.
At most, I would hope.
That's what I was
And
wondering.
psilocybin is in phase 3. It's halfway through phase 3 through 2 different companies. And that will hopefully be early 2027 if it all goes well.
Okay.
And LSD could be as early as 2028, 2029.
Yeah.
So
It's not an if at this point, it's a when.
I think
because the research is very robust.
I think something's going to get approved this decade. It seems that way. And not only something, it's possible we're going to see like 4 approvals this decade. So we hope. I mean, we thought that about MDMA last year, but
right.
It was also the first one that, it makes sense. So anyways, I think a lot's coming in the next few years. Then you have state level approvals with psilocybin in Oregon and Colorado. It's still federally not approved. It's like marijuana, sort of, where it's like there's these state level laws. And in Colorado, it's actually a mental health treatment. In Oregon, it's really a personal development treatment that's been approved. So that's where we are.
Yeah. So I like to tell people, just start learning about it, because
yes, it's time to learn about it, because
it's time to learn about it.
It's time to learn about it. A, you could go get ketamine therapy now. B, you might be getting psilocybin therapy in like a year and a half from now.
Right.
Yeah.
And what's your recommendation if people are wanting to do those medicines now, in terms of going other places, other countries where it's legal to do it? What should they be looking for, just in terms of safety and protocols or questions to ask?
Yeah, I mean, I think everyone has to take their healing into their own hands ultimately anyways, So they should take their healing into their own hands, and if you really believe there's something out there, you should go after it. I do think you have to be very mindful and cautious about who your psychedelic facilitator is going to be. That's important. I mean, are they well trained? If you have a mental health struggle in you, that it's very significant. It's not just I want to go have a spiritual experience and that's what I'm looking for. I would say make sure they have mental health training, and not just a weekend, they have significant mental health training, because you're probably going to face trauma eventually if you do this. You may face it in the one time you do it. And even if you don't, it's good that somebody can recognize too, any other things that might arise, that they're not just spiritualizing everything and just being don't worry about it. It's just spiritual. Let's not worry about it. There are things that can happen that we've talked about a little here, that you want someone that knows what's going on in case you need more support in a certain way. So I would just say, take matters into your own hands for your own healing always, and do it cautiously when you're going to pursue psychedelics. And hopefully you can find a psychedelic therapist that's above ground. That would be ideal, because, this stuff matters. And I'm obviously training in a professional space where we're training above ground, because that's what we want to make accessible to people, where they can rely on the safety of it being above ground.
And we can put in the show notes some links to finding even people that are trained in psychedelic integration.
Yeah.
Because like you said, there's a lot of us that are trained because we've been waiting for these things to get legalized. Right. So if you're going somewhere else to do the medicine, we can work with you after that experience. We can help you prepare before. And that's totally, in my opinion, it's going to be the best experience and getting the most out of the medicine.
Definitely. Yeah. And you mentioned something important when you said abroad, typically if they're going abroad, it's usually ayahuasca, sometimes it's psilocybin, but that's what you're usually seeing when someone goes abroad to find a medicine, a ceremonial experience. And that's its own animal, ayahuasca. And it's actually not one of the medicines that we're researching right now for therapy, really. It's not, but there but that's just ayahuasca is kind of like a larger medicine, but there, DMT, and that is being researched. So the elements within it is being researched.
Mm-hmm.
But ayahuasca has its own unique thing, and
Yeah.
it's its own conversation of what, what should you
Yeah.
be
The whole
thinking
other
about?
podcast.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you so much for coming today and just sharing your story, your wisdom, what you're working on at the Institute, the book coming out. Any last words for our audience as they're, exploring or just being open to what some of these benefits might be? Any tips on how they can go about learning more
I mean, they can come to our website. There are a lot of resources on there, which
in
is
your podcast?
yeah, so it's psychiatryinstitute.com. There's plenty of resources there. The podcast is accessible there. It's the Higher Practice podcast. And I would just say ultimately, like, healing is possible for anyone, and I think
Yes.
that's important. I don't know your story, but I would just say from having a lot of personal experience and working with a lot of clients, that when you're in it, you don't think healing is possible. I mean, you just,
Yeah.
the puzzle you're in feels unique, and well, it is unique to some degree, and you don't know how you're going to get the pieces back together. And I would just say that I have enough experience now among clients and stories and myself of, like, healing's possible, but
Give up hope.
you got to keep
Keep working.
walking.
Keep walking through and
Yeah, you
trying.
got to keep
And
walking the
that's,
path, and
yeah.
you will eventually find your way
And I think
out of
my
the
my
woods.
last piece is the ketamine therapy. People just don't realize how powerful it is for treatment resistant depression. I mean, the
Yeah.
fact that we have the 80% effectiveness for any treatment for depression is, phenomenal. But I mean, for me, just seeing clients coming out of like being stuck for
Yeah.
years and being able to come back to life in a way and living their lives and their passions are coming back to them and they're like, happy again, is it's that part has just been so motivating for me. Is it's what I specialize in, just because I've seen so many transformations. But like those are the most hopeless of hopeless, right? The suicidal clients, the depressed, severely depressed clients. So I guess my alongside what you're saying is don't give up hope. And this option of psychedelics and starting with ketamine, I mean, for those that have severe symptoms, whether anxiety or depression, give it a try. Like it's legal
Yeah.
here, and at least get started with that, because it's very difficult when you're at that level of severity to be able to see any hope, right?
Yeah, I would say, yeah. I mean, if you definitely get evaluated to see if it's right for you, I mean, it's definitely a great step before you try ECT, I would think. I mean, there are cases
Right.
where
Right.
that's the next step, and that's okay. And I have seen a number of people over time who, like, that was the only thing that ever worked for them. But, ketamine therapy is a lot less intrusive than that if you're really severely depressed. And yeah, I mean, there are, many documented cases of people being severe suicidal ideation for a long time. And in the session, it goes away.
Yes.
That
I know.
happens, which is crazy.
I've talked about that. It's like not having to put people in inpatient facilities. I mean, that
Yeah,
alone
that's
is like
crazy. So when
incredible.
it works great.
Yeah,
It's not going to always work, but when it works,
exactly.
it's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. I'm just so
Yeah.
grateful that you guys have done all this research and you're creating so much information and education out there. And hopefully our listeners will listen to your podcast and learn more and just be open to hearing more about it. Because as you said, it's coming
Right.
and it's going to come probably in this decade. So I think we've covered everything, and we're going to have you back with Will as it gets closer to your book release in March.
Right.
And you guys can share more about the details of that. But thank you so much for
Thanks
joining
so
me today.
much. Yeah, it was great being with you.
You
Yeah.
too. So we'll see you guys next week at Catalyst for Healing. Bye.